It is inconsistent because market anarchists oppose actual initiation of force, not whatever someone decides to call the initiation of force, regardless of whether it is or not. In this hypothetical, who decides what is an actual initiation of force? I understand what that means, but my Muslim neighbor disagrees, and he hires an organization offering the service of protecting the rights of Muslims. This hypothetical relates to actual facts in places like Lebanon, Somalia, Iraq, and Gaza West Bank. In a market anarchy situation, what stops Al-Qaeda from providing retaliatory force services? That is what their founders say they are doing now. I notice that you have yet to either say, yes, it is okay for a state to initiate force in order to remain a state, or preventing competition is not initiating force because. With a state, what stops the state from initiating force? And don't say a constitution unless you intend to explain how to prevent it from being ignored like our current one. I ask a question to clarify your statement to me, and you evade it. Not a good sign for your proposition. A proper state does not initiate force when it enforces its authority under objective law over a vigilante force. Constraints against the initiation of force by government are constitutional. The effectiveness and stability of a constitution will become corrupted by changing it to be more democratic, see Yugoslavia and Venezuela. Such democratic changes in the U.S. have effectively eliminated constitutional constraints on the legislature to the detriment of individual rights. A system of voluntary taxation would eliminate one method by which our legislature became so overbearing. Eliminating public education would control for the main source of ignorance in the electorate. I would favor a none-of-the-above option on the ballot with an appointment provision to reduce democratic pandering by candidates. I could go on, but these are limited comments. I wasn't evading your point per se. I do have an answer to it, so much as trying to establish some things first. Tell me, given a state that mostly takes donations in exchange for retaliatory force, taking a payment for a service effectively, and a private institution that tries to do the same exact thing, what makes the private institution vigilante and the state not? Where does the state derive its alleged right to provide retaliatory force that other organizations cannot? Well, if you are not evading, then answer the question. The differences between a proper government and vigilante force is that the former is operating under an objective code of rules for the purposes of protecting individual rights, but the latter is not. That objective code of rules being necessary to bar physical force from social relationships. See the nature of government, virtue of selfishness. Now, that ties in nicely to my question, so I look forward to your answer. What guarantee is there that a state will rely on an objectively correct code of rules, while multiple agencies in a market can actually serve as a check against one another? A state concentrates all that power into one entity. So I can throw your same argument right back at you and ask what's to stop a bunch of religious nuts such as Christians in the United States from gaining control of the state and using that to violate rights. Firstly, in context, I have been speaking about a proper government according to objectives politics. So I think that your question is invalid. Possible valid questions in this context could be: 1, how does an existing government evolve into a proper government according to objectivist politics? Or 2, how does such a government maintain itself so that it does not degenerate? So what are you asking? Did you change the context, intend one of the other 2 questions I stated, or something else? Quotes, multiple agencies in a market can actually serve as a check against one another, end quote. That's called a civil war, isn't it? A proper government stopping religious nuts from taking over. Constitution with separation of powers, guarantee a separation of church and state, and have police and war powers. Actually, that should have been obvious, as history demonstrates that religious nuts take over when either a highly centralized authority is weak or when effective executive power is overly decentralized and in competition. If you can provide a counterexample from reality, please do. Note, you are advocating a system where effective executive power is overly decentralized and in competition. So history is working against your proposition. Are you ever going to answer my question that you have been evading? I thought I had. Which question was that? Quote, in this hypothetical, who decides what is an actual initiation of force? I understand what that means, but my Muslim neighbor disagrees and he hires an organization offering the services of protecting the rights of Muslims. This hypothetical relates to actual facts in places like Lebanon, Somalia, Iraq, Gaza, West Bank. In a market anarchy situation, what stops Al-Qaeda from providing retaliatory services? That is what their founders say they are doing now. End quote. Places with failing states and places with no state but constant international pressure from outside states are not valid examples of a market anarchy. The market would decide war is expensive and unproductive, and only a state has the means to mass extort in order to fund it. People have a basic implicit understanding of natural rights, and I believe that this will bear itself out naturally without a state to enforce it. X, you say that you are still okay with objectivist epistemology, so why is your argument so concrete-bound in attempting to exclude conceptual comparisons? This behavior leads credence to the evaluation that market anarchy is a floating abstraction unconnected to reality. Ironically, your argument sounds like Stalinism and its explanation for why the state did not wither away as Marx predicted. But I appreciate your concession that market anarchy cannot resist external states, which takes the market anarchy idea outside the realm of reality. If the market decides what is an actual initiation of force, doesn't that mean that there will be multiple competing and incompatible ideas? Why do you assume only rational actors when that does not exist in reality? What does expense and unproductive mean to Attila or Al-Qaeda? No one will rediscover Hobbes as a solution to disorder? If I explain why a square is not a circle and should not be considered as such, I am concrete bound and excluding conceptual comparisons, that's silly. A true market anarchy has not existed on a large scale yet. If you want a floating abstraction, let's discuss how a state has to initiate force to remain a state, thus failing at its intended goal of preventing the initiation of force. Wow, you have explicitly made three major concessions so far. 1. Market anarchy is unrealistic as it cannot protect against force by external states. 2. That argument for market anarchy lacks evidence from reality based upon history. And 3. That your argument that states must initiate force to survive is a floating abstraction. Other than identifying them, I'm not particularly interested in debating floating abstractions. I never conceded any of those things. You're ridiculous. Go on believing whatever you want. Oh no! Here comes the climax. That dog is out of control. Somebody needs to put a chain on him. That irrational bullying prick is going to go off any second now.